choice I would give jurors is that it's up to you what kind of government, what kind of society you want to have. Do you want to have a lawless Congress going and dropping bombs on anybody that they feel pissed them off? Or do we make them follow the Constitution? Sometimes I'd win, sometimes I wouldn't. Another area in which this was effective were the drug laws, particularly the ones about marijuana. I won several marijuana cases because the juries wouldn't convict the client for possession of marijuana, period. Sometimes I could point out that there was entrapment and that the police got their promotions by the number of arrests, almost like a quota system. All kinds of things could be pointed out for the juror. And the jurors were told that they had to take all these things in consideration, whether or not to find a defendant guilty of a crime. And what they had to do to begin with was start with whether or not there was a crime and how did you define crime, etc. Well, pretty soon, the judges got together and decided that was too inefficient. So instead of having what was then referred to as jury nullification, they tried to abolish it. Now, jury nullification has been around for centuries. One of the most famous jury nullifications was the trial of William Penn in England. But that doesn't matter because most judges are now specialists in certain areas. Most of them are former prosecutors. Most of them are trained in management by objective. Most of them are somewhat ethically challenged, or they believe they have God on their side and therefore they can punish anybody and kick anybody around because they're bullies. So what they do is they say, well, we need to cut down on the jury trials. Another thing that's coming into play is the pension system. The cheap citizenry doesn't want to pay pensions to judges that aren't in the system for 20 or 30 years. So there's a lack of defense attorneys from private practice that go into the judiciary because typically by the time they know anything about law, they're too old to put in 20 or 30 years as a judge, and then it costs the state more money. It's much better to put in a person who's been in the state system for 10 or 15 years and make that person a judge. Plus, it can perpetuate the bureaucracy. And thirdly, it becomes very efficient. And fourthly, many of these people aren't really trained as lawyers, they're trained as administrators. There'll be more about that later. So we have this situation where we have ex-prosecutors becoming judges, ruling on cases, and viewing their jobs as being as efficient as they can. So the job of the modern day judge is to see how many cases he can move from the left side of his desk to the right side with the least amount of resistance. And trials are inefficient, and other kinds of resistance, like motions, are inefficient. So they cut down on them, and the prosecutors make decisions to cut down on them. And since most of the judiciary are ex-prosecutors and get frustrated by case management, and judges are also measured by their case management abilities, then it becomes a contest to see who can screw the most defendants most often with the least amount of resistance and publicity. So juries are now told that their job only is to determine facts and nothing else. So if you have somebody that started a fire, you're to determine whether or not that person started a fire. And if he started the fire, you don't think about it anymore. You find him guilty of starting the fire. And it's up to the prosecutor then to define the consequences and nature of the fire. He can present evidence that the fire was used as a backfire to keep the spread of a forest fire, or it was preventive, or it was to kill an infectious virus or bacteria, or some other reason. But the jury isn't allowed typically to go into the reasoning just to determine whether or not there is a fire. Now forget about the fire part and assume that there's a pollution rule that you can prosecute somebody for making smoke. Well, that's even more discretionary, and it's more important for the jury to discover why there's smoke, but they are no longer able to do so. So what's happened is we've had a deterioration in the quality of law and in the ability of lawyers, turning them more into bureaucrats and administrators than lawyers. Lawyers are trained to look at big pictures. They're trained to look at all the consequences. Prosecutors used to be trained this way. They no longer are. They're trained to determine whether or not there's a violation, and if there is a violation, what violation to bring, and how to prosecute the case. And their job is to get as many prosecutions and convictions as they can during their tenure in office. The more convictions they get, the more attention they get, and the more likely they can go to a high-priced firm and bill much higher rates on billable hours, or raising the bureaucracy to super grade level or something such as that. In any event, the public gets screwed. But not the rich public, only the bad public, which means the peasantry. So we have efficient administration of the law. We have efficient courts and things such as that. And still the power structure or the industrialists and business people aren't satisfied. They want more power. They don't want any law that protects the people to speak of. So for decades, there's been a fight among the legislators and the people of the function of a government. Is a government to protect the people, to serve the people, or is it to serve the interests of the rich? That argument is been going on for centuries. Right now, it looks like they view their job as to protect the interests of the rich. And it becomes more and more obvious the wider television audiences become. The more that police can get away with brutalizing citizens and to keep them in line so they don't protest, the better the power structure feels about things. So as long as cops can get away with beating the shit out of somebody and killing more citizens than die in wars, we're going to have this type of system. And as long as we have judges that rule that motivation or fairness of the statute doesn't matter, you're going to have injustice. So what's going on nowadays is you might have all kinds of people's lobbying for environmental laws. And the rich find the environmental laws inconvenient. But they can't really go out and say that because it's bad publicity. So they enter into trade agreements, and the trade agreements pretty much nullify most of the consumer laws that were enacted by legislatures to placate the rabble or the people. The same way with environmental laws. Environmental laws protect the planet and they protect the citizenry, but they interfere with the greed and corruption and ability of corporations to turn humongous profits. So the corporations want to go back to laissez-faire, which means buyer beware, so they can screw as many people as they can with as little consequences as they have. The whole system then becomes corrupt, and it's corrupted in such a small way, it's like putting a lobster in a pot of water and turning the gas on and gradually upping the temperature till the water boils and the lobster dies. They are unaware that this is happening. And that's what's happening now. Our society is put into a cauldron, and the power structure keeps turning up the heat, and we're going to be boiled alive, and we're not going to have any power left. Not only that, we're so enamored and impressed with businessmen because they have lots of money that they've stolen that we cheer them on. It's ironic. Well, that's enough for today. Hope everybody enjoys my little talk, and there'll be more later. Bye.